Welcome back, my gardening friends, to another Focal Point Friday episode. Let's spend just a few minutes together reviewing a snippet of information from a previous episode, highlighting a new topic, or quickly focusing on a current event in the food and agriculture world. Let's get down and dirty. So, we hit 102 degrees Fahrenheit here today with a heat index of 109. And yes, it was absolutely as bad as it sounds. I took a walk in that heat down to our front field, and I saw exactly what I expected to see. The plants were all curling their leaves to protect themselves from transpiring any moisture whatsoever. Now, the problem here is that that field is already bone dry due to the lack of rain, and the tomatoes and the peppers are absolutely suffering for it, and there's a lot of stunted growth on some of the other plants. So I am right now waiting for the sun to start setting while I record this so I can go back down there and use our water wagon to try to get some moisture into those plants. And I know a lot of you are in a real heat wave right now, and it's making the gardens really suffer. If you see your plants completely wilting during the day in the heat right now, especially those plants that have larger leaves like the squash and the cucumbers, don't rush to water them before checking the soil moisture, and don't do it in the heat of the day. So if you check the soil and it's still damp a few inches down, you're good. Those plants are just protecting themselves from the heat. They're doing their job. Now, if you go back later in the evening, they should have bounced back after the sun goes down, and certainly by the next morning, they should have perked back up. Now, if your soil moisture is low, the morning would be the perfect time to give them a good soak. Remember, we want to be watering at about the 6-inch depth when possible, though. So if the only time that you have to do that is in the evening, that's fine too. Just be sure you're doing it at the soil level. Now, with this type of extreme heat, you may also be experiencing blossom drop. This is another energy protection measure for the plants. If they're struggling in the heat, they are certainly not going to expend the energy that's needed to start fruiting, so the blossoms are just going to drop off of the plant. In my experience, the plants that seem to be the most prone to this are tomatoes, peppers, and beans, although it is absolutely possible that it can happen in just about any plant under the right circumstances. This problem will stop once you get past the extreme temperatures. Now, the other part of this is that high temperatures can also interrupt pollination, either from a lack of pollinator activity just because it's an extreme situation, or because the pollen just gets unusually sticky when the humidity kicks in, and it can be harder to shake it loose from the flower. This too is a problem that will resolve itself once the temperatures settle, or, that you can solve yourself with some hand pollination. But have patience, grasshopper, this too shall pass. Now, besides wilting plants that are trying to protect themselves from the heat, one thing that you will also notice specifically with tomatoes is a lack of ripening. You may have a ton of tomatoes on the vine that look like they should be turning, but they might still be green, or they may just barely have started to lighten up a shade or two or look slightly yellow. This is also normal. The optimum temperature range for ripening tomatoes is 68 to 77 degrees Fahrenheit. The further the temperatures stray away from these optimum temperatures, the slower the ripening process is going to be. And when the temperatures are outside that optimum range for extended periods, then these conditions can become so stressful that the ripening process basically just stops. So, for example, our high yesterday was 99 Fahrenheit. Our overnight low was 78. It literally never dropped into that optimum temperature range at any time in the past 36 hours, and it's not forecasted to for like another 36 hours. And at the same time, tomatoes do not produce lycopene or carotene when temperatures are above 85 Fahrenheit. Those are the pigments that are responsible for that ripe tomato color. So extended periods of this type of extreme heat can also cause the tomatoes to just stop ripening. And those fruits are often going to turn that pale green to yellowish color that I mentioned before. Now, if you have tomatoes that are in that state right now, and it doesn't look like the temperatures are going to be conducive anytime soon, you can absolutely pick those ones that have started their color change and bring them inside to optimum conditions, and they will ripen up properly in just a day or two on the counter. Otherwise, there are a few tricks that'll help your tomatoes and your other garden plants beat the heat right now. Now, the usual suspects are all at play here, like making sure they're still well watered and adding additional layers of mulch to trap that moisture in if necessary. But two things you might not think about are shade cloth and fertilizer, or, well, actually a lack of fertilizer. So if you have the ability to use some row covers or even bed sheets to suspend above or at an angle to your crops, or even a patio umbrella or a pop-up canopy, something to protect your tomatoes or your peppers or your other plants from the worst of the afternoon heat, then this is going to help keep them cooler and less stressed, and they will need to take up less moisture. It might look silly, but who cares if it works, right? We've put too much work into this thus far to have it be lost just because the temperatures got too high. Now, the second thing is to resist the urge to fertilize. I know the temptation when our plants look like they're struggling is to immediately give them something to eat, feed them to perk them up. But in this case, I would skip the plant juice for now. When your plant is in survival mode, you don't want to encourage any new growth. That takes a lot of energy from the plant. And that boost of nutrients you give them is just going to encourage the plant to produce more leaves, since at the moment it can't produce fruit. So that energy will go to leaves instead of flowers, and those are going to drop off anyway. And this is going to put more strain on the plant, and that's the last thing that you want for an already stressed out plant. I also would not be doing any pruning or trellising at the moment either, because that can also cause further stress. That can all wait a few days until the temperatures get back to normal. So stick to just water for now until the heat breaks, add some mulch to trap that moisture, provide some shade if you can, and then reevaluate your plants once the worst of the heat has moved on to see if they need trellising, pruning, nutrients, or other care. Thanks for joining me on this Focal Point Friday. I'll be back again on Tuesday for another regular episode of the Just Grow Something podcast. So until next time, my gardening friends, keep on cultivating that dream garden, and we'll talk again soon.